Thanks. Welcome everybody to the CBCS weekly seminar. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that the lands in which we're speaking today, meeting, are traditionally the Yugara and Turrbal people, a place where learning and storytelling has been carried on for millennia. So we pay our respects to their elders, emerging past and present. So our guest speakers today are Amanda Niehaus and Jessica White. Amanda did her PhD in this school, in its former entity, on ecophysiology, and got a DECRA as well, but since then has shifted into the creative writing process, obviously inspired by her considerable scientific experience. So she did a novel, for example, called The Breeding Season, inspired by the northern quail. And she's won a host of prizes, including runner-up last year in the Bragg Prize for science writing. Jessica White is also a novelist, currently working on an eco-biography of Western Australia's first Indigenous female scientist, Georgiana Mavoy, and has also recently published a book, Silence is My Habitat. Together, they're the co-editors and co-founders of ScienceWriteNow, which merges creative writing with scientific inspiration. So talk to us about that today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick, and thank you everyone for coming. It's really nice to see you all here, and we're excited about your interest in us and our magazine. So I'm Jess. I also have to add, I'm quite deaf. I've only got a bit of hearing in my right ear. So if you have questions afterwards, either Amanda will repeat them or I might be able to catch them. So what we'll do, we'll talk a bit about the magazine. Amanda will also take you through the magazine and talk about our next edition, and then we'll also talk about fundraising campaign. So here we are. This is our 11th edition on synergy, and I don't think what we do is strictly science communication. It's creative writing inspired by science. So we have poetry, we have memoir, which is writing about your life, focusing on stringing memories together. We have some comics, and we have the illustrations on each cover, fiction and non-fiction. And we met in 2018, yeah, and we both had DECRAs. I had one in School of Communication and Arts, drawings. And Ashley Hay introduced us. She's a wonderful science and nature writer. She said, Amanda's got this idea. I think, well, I'm for new ideas. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. Then I went off to Munich and had a fellowship. And then COVID happened and I came back and I basically lost my job. That's the straightforward way of explaining the situation. And Amanda and I said to each other, how about that thing? I was like, okay, but we need some money. So we applied to Creative Australia, which is the arts funding body in Australia. And we got 10 grand. We had these wildest ideas about producing lots and lots of issues. And so we started off with 4 issues. And then that came for a year, then that went to 3, and then 2, and now we're up to 1 because we're just so I'm now an academic at the University of South Australia. And I have no time. And Amanda does a lot of the legwork, support for interns, but just can't pay anything. So it's a constant juggle to maintain its viability, which is common for most literary magazines in Australia. But we've done lots and lots of stuff. This is issue number 11. We have a Substack, which you can read, and that has over 500 subscribers. We have a podcast with 34 episodes. And the issues have been on things like women scientists on disability in the body, still on synergy, on humour, and if you go to read, it'll show you all of the editions that have got their things that we have. And we also have quite a big international readership as well, which is nice. I think that's Amanda's legwork in knowing lots of people around the world. But because it is so much work, we rely on interns from mostly from UQ, but we've also had them from the University of Melbourne to help Amanda do some of the question stuff. We also engage with high school students, and give them experience and traction with their writing. And we did try some writing classes that didn't work. So that's us in a nutshell. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, thanks, Jeff. Before I thought I might just walk you through the website a little bit, but also I think one of the things that's important to talk about is that we have made an effort so far to be open access. Because a lot of literary magazines, because it's an expensive thing to do, and it takes a lot of time, that do have to charge membership or subscription fees. And we have tried so far to not do that. So some of the things that we value open access science, which I think you guys probably talk a lot about. Open access writing, like literature should be available to everyone. But also we value paying the writers and artists who work with us. So like Jess said, when the money comes in, we basically give it away. We give it to the people who are doing the art and the writing, rather than paying ourselves, which is something that we're trying to change moving forward to make this more sustainable. It's a really difficult balance, actually, figuring out. It's kind of like starting a new postdoc or PhD, right? It's like you always start too big, and at some point your advisor is like, "That's huge. That is not gonna work in the 3 years or whatever you have." And we've kind of had that process for ourselves in this project where, like Jess said, we started way too big, and because we want to do all the things, we're enthusiastic, right? And so we've now pared back so that we're kind of focused on the things that are working best for us. But the next stage of what we're gonna need to do is find a way to make ourselves financially viable for the future. So I'll walk you through. Where is this, your computer that's hooked up here? It's you. Do you mind if I scroll around? Yeah. Cool. So just to walk you through the website. So this is the homepage. About is where you can learn kind of about why we do what we do. Oh no, I'm good. Thank you. Why we do what we do, who we are. This is me, this is Jess, this is Bianca, who just finished up so the UQ grad school has those what are they called? Where PhD students can go. Yeah, placements. That's it. Yes, thank you. So Bianca just finished a placement with us, where she basically took over the podcast and newsletter on a part-time basis over the last year and a half, which was awesome. And I would say if any of you are students or have students who are really interested in getting experience in podcasting or newsletter writing, this is something worth exploring with us, because we do give a lot of mentorship for students in the writing space and conversation space, but we also like to encourage our interns to kind of go off on their own, really kind of make something for themselves and use it. Bianca used this to interview a lot of writers and scientists whose work was connected with her own thesis. So she was able to meet a lot of people under the guise of doing this podcast with them, that she's also able to use that for her work. We also have so when we go into the individual, so the read here, as Jess said, are all of our editions. Since 2000, these are the themes that we've worked with. We always try to choose a sort of scientific theme that we ask people to submit work that's associated with that. We don't when we give, we do write sort of a call out, right? To say our next edition is going to be on migration. These are the kinds of things we're looking for, but really we want to see what arts workers are going to come up with around that central idea. We don't want to limit them to a particular, like, this is how we define migration. We would like to have a diverse set of stories, poems, essays, etc., that kind of speak to that scientific theme from different perspectives. And so over time, as well, as Jess said, we have we've grown our international audience and our international writers that we publish. So we now have probably about 50% of each edition from overseas, which is sad for them because we pay in Australian dollars. So they almost always get, like, you know, a few copies out of it by the time they do the exchange, but that's okay. So if we go back, so if we click on, we'll go back to Disability in the Body, was an edition that just got funding from Arts South Australia to support. This is kind of the standard that each edition looks like at the moment. So we have started since about edition 6 commissioning an artwork or licensing an artwork for each edition. And so that's another way that we support Australian artists. We've had some really cool art as part of our editions now, which is exciting. But then each edition will feature poetry, essays. So this is an essay that Bianca wrote before she was even an intern with us. And so, you know, this is kind of like where you can come to read, but also it's where you can come to see, you know, who these people are and what some of the other things that they've written are. So there's a lot to explore there. We also have a podcast, which is on, you know, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Buzzsprout, everywhere that you want to listen to podcasts. Like I said, Bianca made the podcast her own while she was with us, and her work is kind of looking at the junction between arts work and neurological disability. So she's been talking with a lot of people in the space of psychology, neuroscience, arts, and really trying to kind of understand different perspectives on how different people navigate neurological challenges in the creation space. But, you know, we also have, we've got chats with lots of different writers and scientists on the podcast and people in between. So it's definitely worth having a look. There's always good, we do talk to a lot of writers around the time when their book comes out. So you'll see some good book recommendations on here too, of things that have kind of a sciencey bent. I guess that's one thing to clarify, is that we're not just all about science fiction. It's really about the different ways that science can be woven into stories. And that's something that both Jessica and I have been interested in. Jessica from the memoir and biography space, although she has written novels, I guess my novels are very focused on the science and how that science can be integrated into everyday stories. So it's not about couples in space dealing with growing beans on Mars, but it's about, you know, couples in Brisbane, one of whom just happens to be a scientist who's studying northern faults and how that affects their relationship and the way she sees the world. So we do have call outs once a year. So I would encourage you to sign up to our newsletter, because there's always like really cool links and news. at the intersection of science and the arts that's kind of the space that we like to really share for people. And then once a year or so, we will have a call out for essays, poems, art, stories around a certain theme. And Jess is going to talk in a little bit about our next theme, which is very much related to stuff you guys do. And so I would encourage any of you, if you write or if your students write, or your friends, like submit. We'd love to hear from you. We love, creative writing of all kinds. And there will also be opportunities moving forward. We're hoping to get scientists more directly involved in the writing work that we do. And so we may also have opportunities for people for scientists to contribute directly, not just through creative writing, but in talking about their research. Which is also, I want to say too, if you would like we're always looking for guests on the podcast. And so if you have a good idea for something that sits at this intersection, or you think that people who like both the arts and the sciences might be interested in, definitely reach out. We're like very easygoing people, and we love to hear ideas and we love to hear from you. And so this is just another place to find our newsletter. Our newsletter comes out once a fortnight is what we tend to aim for. We tend to have one feature, which sometimes is an in-depth feature on a particular writer or a book that's coming out. Sometimes it's a feature about one of our podcasts that's just launching. But then they always include links and ideas. And at some point, we're very keen to do sort of a month of prompts as well for writers to be thinking about a scientific idea through writing prompts, basically ideas to, okay, today sit down and spend 15 minutes writing about this idea. And that's something that we're hoping to do in the future. Jess is going to talk a little bit more about the support us side of things as well. One last thing I want to talk just briefly about is Jess did mention that we have mentored some high school students in creative writing about science. And that was a project sponsored by Engaging Science Queensland through the Office of the Chief Scientist of Queensland, Kerry Wilson. And that basically enabled us to mentor 8 high school students over the last year. 4 of them, we're currently finishing up an edition on quantum that will be coming out this month. And so we're going to have 4 pieces that have been written by high school students that are just amazing. I'm so excited to be sharing those because these are really brilliant students. But I'll just show you here. We had 2 in our last edition. So we had 2 of the 8 were editorial fellows, and so they worked on the sort of editing and publishing side of things with one of our previous staff. But I don't know why that's, sorry, I must have pressed the wrong thing. So we have, or there's like something, there's a glitch. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So we have, I'll just show off a couple of these stories. We have a beautiful short story called The Greater Story, written by, this was a year 12 student who's now at UQ doing engineering. And we have another student called James Reese, who's actually doing a Bachelor of Advanced Science. So keep your eyes out for James. But this is a beautiful horror story that's inspired by the idea of synergetic interactions between drugs. So that was how that spoke to our synergy theme. But we're hoping to keep running the mentorship. We've applied for more funding from the government to do another round of those because it's just been an incredible experience. And I think the students have really enjoyed it as well. So I'm going to turn this over to Jess. And
Thanks. Okay, so our next edition is on the little things. And what we've found over the years is that people want a book to hold in their hands, that it's because the screen's not tangible. And also, if we have a book, we can take it to writers' festivals, and we can interact with people, sit on panels. But we need some money to get this thing going. I'll talk about science a bit in a little bit because we love your ideas about little things. But what we're doing at the moment is we're running a campaign through the Australian Cultural Fund, which is an organisation set up to allow artists to collect donations that are tax deductible. Because to be tax deductible, you have to be incorporated. You have to be an organisation, and it's very complicated, and I'm not good at that stuff. This is part of an initiative run by Creative Australia, which is Australia's funding body for the arts, a national funding body. And on the 23rd of October, next Thursday, or very soon, they're running this nationwide campaign to say, look, here are all the projects associated with the Cultural Fund. Please give them money on Oz Arts Giving Day. So we've set up a page to kickstart our funding for the little things. And we will have a book, and we will also have an online edition. And in the book, we're going to pair scientists with writers, and the writer will collaborate with the scientist to create a piece of fiction, a short story, about a piece of science that the scientist is involved in, works on. And so what we're doing specifically through this campaign is trying to raise money for 2 emerging writers and 2 ECR scientists in the hope that they'll work together. So we'd love to get this out as widely as possible. So if you want to jump on our ACF page and give us a couple of dollars, that'd be great. Or if you could share it with your networks, that would also be super. If you go to the Science Right Now page, Amanda has written this very detailed account of what it costs to run a magazine and the amount of work involved, and a lot of it is just unpaid, as Amanda said. So trying to get some money, and also trying to get off the grant route, because occasionally we don't get funded, and that's what's happened in the last round. So we're kind of like, oh, what do we do now? So you have to come up with some creative solutions to try and keep going with the magazine. So this is our attempt to try and work out how on earth you raise money for a magazine. So did you want to?
Can I add? Can I just clarify before you talk a bit more about the little things? Yeah. Just to clarify, we're not actually going to be asking the scientists to do the creative writing. So the collaboration will be more of it's more going to be a collaboration of ideas, and so the idea is that we want to have an established, or even like someone who has some experience doing creative writing, essays. Actually, in this case, it's going to be short stories. So a short story writer that we can pair with a scientist to kind of talk through the science to make sure that they can get it right in whatever form it takes in their short story. So when you look through the magazine, you'll see that the science is not always overt. Sometimes it's there, but it's more as a setting or as a character. So you might have a character who's a scientist, or you might have a setting that's very, very nature or science based. And sometimes it might just be the idea is a jumping off point. And so, but regardless of that, we are always careful. We always want to be sure that the science is as correct as possible, so that when people are inspired, they're inspired by the right information, not misinformation, which there's enough of in the world today. So what we're planning is to partner short story writers with scientists in a conversational way, so that they can talk through the science. And then in the print edition, which will be our first print edition, and we will be charging for that side of things. We'll ask the scientists just to write a couple paragraphs that will go behind each short story as a kind of like, this is the conversation we were having. This is the kind of science that I've been doing, or that we've been working on in my research group, and this is where I see it sitting, so that there's some context. Because we do feel it's important, this next edition, The Little Things, has a lot of, as Jess will talk about, like, we want to focus on the overlooked conservation issues, like the little guys, like the southern emu wren, right? That just get squashed by rocket launchers. Like, that is what we want to do. And so we want to have the most opportunity to engage with audiences who both like fiction, but also want to know the reality behind it too. And so this is going to be the first time that we give voice to scientists in that way, which we're really excited about. So anyway, I'll stop blabbing. Back to Jessica.
Yeah. So at this point, it would be nice to have your ideas. I'm sure you're all very creative people as well as scientific people. So one example of a pairing. So I stepped back from the magazine because I'm an overworked academic, and I run at the advisory board, of which me is a member. And in our last meeting, we did some workshopping about ideas about little things. And one example was toxoplasmosis. Is that how you say it? Yeah. And pairing that idea with a romance writer. It might be the cat lady trope, but pairing the science with the genre of romance writing and seeing what comes out of it. Another one was there's a writer called James Bradley who does speculative fiction and creative non-fiction, and he's obsessed with Tristan rafts in the sea. So we're going to get James to try and write something fictional about these rafts. So other ideas that we had were nanobacteria, Christmas beetles, boggle moths, parasites, COVID-19, in the sense that it's encroaching on animals' habitats, it's causing the bugs to jump. Sorry, I'm not a scientist at the science, and you can probably tell, but I do find it very interesting. The stegofauna, we've had a conversation with Hugh Possingham, who suggested the freshwater land snails. Also the orchids, which I write about too in my eco-biography of Georgiana Malloy. She was a botanist, the first Wajira or white person in southwest WA. She started collecting species. And I'm using this idea of interdependency and this specific relationship between thin-end wasps and the orchids. So the wasp thinks that the orchid is a mate because it smells good, and so it pollinates the wasp. When the wasp is trying to copulate with the orchid, and then jumps to another flower and then transmits the pollen. And there's such specific relationships that they only exist in southwest Western Australia. And so I'm using that as a metaphor to explain about the relationship between humans and the environment. And if our environment deteriorates, well, humans are not going to survive. That's very basic translation of what I'm working on. So orchids are little things, plankton and krill, butterflies, ants. So they're just some of the ideas, but we'd love to hear more because you're all experts in this stuff. Big believer in like opening it up to creative contributions. Yeah.
Yeah, because I guess just to follow on from that, I mean, one of the next steps for us is going to be creating this call out for writers to express interest in participating. And what we'd like to have at that stage is some ideas just to kickstart their thinking. Some writers like James Bradley might come in with something that they're already obsessed about, but others might be interested in sort of like just hearing about what some of the big conservation issues are. So the little things, we're really thinking about kind of the uncharismatic species. So the ones that don't get the media attention, the ones that are overlooked, also like little ecologies that have big impacts. So that's the kind of vibe we're looking for. And I guess one of the reasons we wanted to come and talk to you all is to hear some ideas, hopefully from you, about some work that might be happening in this area that we could actually feature. So, and like Jess said, Peter is part of our advisory panel. And so we've had Peter and Hugh Possingham and a couple other scientists, Jess Marsh.
And then two artists, Debbie Simons and Erica Sickham, yeah. And they've given us images for our social media and they're just beautiful, really lovely. Yeah. And then Amanda, me and Danielle Clove, who's writing from non-fiction writer in South Australia. Yeah.
So I guess we're interested if any of you have ideas here today, but also anyone who's listening to the recording or can think of something later, you can always just please email us. We have I think there's a contact form on our website, or just email. Yeah, I don't know if you have access to our email through the newsletter or anything. So we're pretty so. I don't know, did anyone have any ideas or things that you think we should be thinking about? Yeah.
As you were discussing some of the perspectives on this idea of little things, one thing that occurred to me, not necessarily from my own work, but just from science as a whole, is we so frequently focus on scale and learning things from small scale case studies that can be applied to the bigger scale, and even in different ways of, what you learn from, say, a feather of a bird or the leaf of a tree that tells you about the whole organism. And I was wondering if that could be another sort of perspective on that topic.
I love that, yeah. Actually, that's like a great children's book series. Like, what can a feather say? There we go. That's how we make our millions.
I'm not gonna lie, I did actually get the idea for kids. I work in environmental education.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, well, this is it. This is your future, actually. Sorry, whatever you're doing right now, you have to write children's books. Yeah, no, I love that. Here.
I think maybe following up on that, something that comes to mind is the microbiome, the bacterial, the health of the internal piece of earth in each individual, and then how that reflects the external health or lack of it.
Yeah, so the
Sorry, I can't do my thing, so I was getting to check out.
the microbiome.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah, and I think there's there have been
Don't think of bacteria as critters.
no, exactly. And also I think we forget that it's not just us that carries around all these bacteria, but every other species, right? I guess too, if you have any questions about what we do or about how we got to where we are, or yeah, we're happy to chat about anything. Yeah.
I have a question about the space where science and fiction meet. And I feel like a lot of what is happening is that science is brought into fiction, in either as a setting or as some kind of explanatory device. And I'm very curious about the other way. So it's very common that philosophy and fiction, they blend very well. There's some examples of history too, like the history of the French Revolution from Carlyle, for example. But I haven't really found any sort of STEMmy science fiction works where the fiction is used to benefit science or to make the scientists understand something that they might have otherwise missed? Are you aware of some work that sort of going the other way?
I think you need to read Amanda's novel.
But I don't think I've benefited, like how could the fiction benefit science? Is the question really.
Oh, beyond communicating science.
Yeah. Did you have a response?
That's a question.
Yeah.
So there's this thing called serendipity in research, in which you find something that's outside of your research field and like influences. There's like thousands of examples of this throughout history where like something, most famous example is penicillin, right? And it was outside, and got the yeast cultures from the pub or something next door, and people discovered that. But there is some stuff that's been done on like not philosophy exactly, but there's some stuff that's like
Inspiration.
I can come up with some things for you. Yeah, there's some little things out there. That's
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a really good point, that inspiration and ideas can come from anywhere, including a novel that you're reading. Whether it's about science or not. Did you?
Yeah, I was still thinking about your novel because I didn't know anything about the creature, the breeding habits of the creature you're talking about until you kind of wrote about it. So you didn't just, but you used that as a motif for explaining the relationship between the couple in the book as well. So it's, I guess it is science communication, but it was still doing more than that, I think, in the book.
Yeah. Yeah, to me, I think what I'm personally interested in is using fiction as a way of saying, okay, here's the science, and this is what it can mean in all of our lives, on this other level. And whether that gives anything back to science or scientists, I don't know. I guess it's interesting that you asked that, because I guess it indicates to me that I hadn't really been thinking about that. Yeah.
But I mean, has anybody here as a scientist not been inspired by something outside of science?
That I think is sort of more like a passive way when the scientist sort of looks at something and then gets inspired by it. But the work of art, I presume, is not written to inspire or to make a scientific progress happen.
Yeah.
And I think the fiction has tools that science doesn't have. Like we're very good at quantifying stuff and you can understand, so this works very well in lots of things. But there's a big aspect of science that this kind of quantification doesn't work at all for. And so I feel like science is just losing a lot of opportunity by not engaging seriously with sort of other approaches to the knowledge or to ideas. And I've been looking for this kind of stuff in science fiction for quite a while, and I haven't really found any.
But in science fiction, there are lots of kind of inventions that have happened before the reality. And there's the whole idea too of futures thinking. So sort of cultivating that sort of imagination for what might happen or what could be developed in the future over different scales. That comes that people from, like, that writers naturally engage as they write.
Yeah, William Gibson was writing about the internet and neuromancer in the 1960s. I don't know if he coined the idea of the internet, but he was popularizing it in that book. And that's the book Blade Runner was based on, neuromancer. Yeah. There's also my partner is a philosopher and was a former ecologist, and he has a theory that all the tech bros try to engineer these worlds from books they read about in the 1980s. That's why we're heading for disaster, because they didn't realize it was fiction. Yeah.
Just to throw out, it's not necessarily written. There's a lot of tech that's designed off of TV shows, like Star Trek, for example, inspired a lot of the mobile devices we have today.
Yeah.
See, the problem is, I think of lots of examples like Star Trek, right? Where you go space, where you go civilization, you go like, there's the categorization for civilizations where like humanity's epitome civilization is one where we can harness power from the sun, you know, like it's that sort of thing. I mean, obviously that's solar panels, but the Edison sphere, right? I think it's what it's called. I can't remember if it's Edison or not. Dyson sphere, thank you. Is that sort of future? I think that's all space. I can't think of examples of conservation.
Yeah.
Like it goes smaller. I can't think of things that inspire science in conservation. That's tricky.
I think usually what it does, it tends to be associated with society. I'm failing to pull the examples from my mind, but I vaguely recall some related to things like agriculture, but I think it's usually still through the human perspective, not necessarily conservation or the environment on its own terms.
Maybe people are also talking about non-indigenous, right? Like isn't not from an expert point of view, but indigenous knowledge systems, storytelling and science are not so separate.
A really great example for that is bushfires, because Aboriginal cultural knowledge about land management for thousands of years in Australia is excellent for bushfire prevention.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's
I like that though, it feels like a challenge. Yeah. Like how could a piece of fiction inspire conservation? Aside from just saying, well, this is what could happen if we do this, I mean, there's always just following a trajectory down to its natural conclusion, other things.
It also seems like a lot of storytelling is very much about the villain or the bad or the, so having a story that's compelling, that is positive or engenders positive behavior or
That's
innovation is innovative in itself.
Yeah, yeah.
I have a genre called solarpunk, which is speculative fiction with a hopeful future, and it's based on the idea that technology is going to save us, which I don't think it's true. It's not going to. But people are trying to. Sorry, I'm not listening. But there are people actively trying to imagine a positive future rather than, and a lot of we work in climate fiction, and a lot of the genre is about doom and gloom, and these people try to actively fight against that and come up with positive solutions. So I guess fiction is a laboratory of a kind. Yeah.
I did a few years ago, I was part of I did a collaboration with Kelly Fielding and Ange Dean, who you guys probably know, and a PhD student who was, I think, in psychology and communication. And it was looking at the responses of readers to different kinds of literature about climate change. And my role was to write a short story that was about a kind of climate change. And so I wrote about a flood and about a young woman, a uni student losing a cat in the flood. And it was a really interesting process for me because the whole point was that the participants in the study were going to read my story, or they were going to read something nonfiction about floods and climate change, or they were going to read just some random facts about something. And then they were going to assess how they felt about climate change before and after that. And for me, the difficulty was that I was asked to keep pushing the agenda of the story to make it more obvious than I felt comfortable as a short story writer doing. So it was very much like I felt like it was enough to have this cat get lost in a flood and have, you know, somebody somewhere sort of mentioning that they're volunteering to do this thing. And but it had to, like, in order, as part of the collaborative process, I needed to make that more overt, that no, like, you are bad if you don't support the climate change work, and you are good if you do. So you had like the good characters who were pro sort of activism, and then you had these negative characters, which as a writer I felt very uncomfortable with, because I don't like having characters who are black and white in any regard. I want everyone to be shades of gray. And I found that really interesting in teaching me what a science communicator and a scientist felt were the ways to sort of engage audiences versus what I felt as a creative writer. Yeah, but I mean, in the end, the story, it did come out a bit. I cannot remember the results entirely, but I mean, the story did engage people, even if it was a little bit of a heavy stick. A bit, yeah, just a bit didactic. Yeah,
I think you lose your reader.
yeah,
They go over their head with all the facts, they're not going to pay attention. You have to, yeah, it's the skill in writing is to draw the reader in, not tell them what's going on, because if you to draw them in and involve them in the text story, they feel more engaged with the work because their brain is engaging with the writing. You tell them what's going on. So seduction.
yeah.
Yeah.
I like when my daughter was little, I had this cookbook that was about ways of sneaking vegetables into like foods, right? And so I always call it, I really love the idea of it's being like the spinach and the brownies. It's like you get to the end of the book and you're like, wait a second, is there science in it? Yeah, I kind of like that's kind of I like playing around as a writer. I like playing around with how subtle can I make the science and have it still be foundational, but not necessarily recognizable. Yeah, that's just me personally.
Yes, I'm a fan of Orion and Emergence.
Oh yeah,
And I'm just wondering how you sit in relation to those, what are your differences?
the Orion, the magazine. Yeah, I love Orion. I think one of the differences is when we publish essay, it tends to be more personal than a lot of the other magazines. So really focused on creative writing rather than narrative or journalistic nonfiction. And so it's really about the intersection of science with everyday lives is I think kind of where we sit, which is where, a lot of stuff in Orion could sit. I mean, Brian Doyle is one of my favorite, he was one of my favorite environmental writers, and yeah, his work was always very personal. Always kind of, I saw this hummingbird today and this is what it did to me, right? And I think that's so beautiful and so important. Yeah, I would be curious where Ryan gets their funding to go. Ryan, you need a little sister magazine, is that you? Yeah. No, I actually have read Emergence. So I don't know that one, but I do enjoy Orion and Aeon and Nautilus. Some of the other ones in that space. Yeah. Yeah, I guess as a reader of those magazines, I presume, what do you enjoy about them?
The intersectionality and bridging these seemingly separate worlds, and coming from a creative background, it does create a bridge into what is the science, or what are the other ways of looking at the same scene, same situation. Yeah, and the variety, and also having the themes like you have.
Yeah.
I like that theme-based focus.
Does Orion do themes?
I'm not sure in this moment,
Okay.
but I feel like one of them does. Because
Yeah.
it seems familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful.
We have time for one more question, point of discussion. Anybody has? I have a quick question about the process. So that the pairings with scientists and writers, how what's the success rate of those? And does it involve careful pre-selection of the pairing scientists and
I think
writers?
so. So we haven't done it on this level before. But as part of the mentorship with the high school students, each of in this most recent edition, each of the high school students was partnered with a quantum scientist for a chat about their story and about the scientist's research. And those were scientists who offered. So we did all of that pairing through the state government, through the Engaging Science program. So they had a number of quantum scientists that they reached out to that they had worked with before. So they had already pre-selected a little bit, and then it was a matter of, we had a group of scientists who messaged back and said, we'd love to participate. And then I kind of went through, and knowing what each student was writing about, tried to pair them with someone that I felt would best connect with their work. So it was kind of a multi-layered process. I know I have been in a couple of mentorship programs myself where it was a careful pairing of both ideas, but also personalities a little bit, as much as can be done when you don't really know everyone really well. But I think that like the better connection there is at the beginning, the more like interesting stuff is gonna happen, right? If people automatically or more easily feel comfortable with each other, then that's when the really cool idea exchange will happen, I think. So I think we'll be looking for people who are interested in talking to writers about some of these issues, and coming into it with like we always want people to come into it with curiosity, not with ego, but with a curiosity about how the other side sees something, which is, I think, the really exciting part of the project.
I should have mentioned Amanda was on our expert panel for the art and conservation science workshop that myself and CBCS Tuesday
That was great.
a couple of months ago. And one thing that struck me then was you mentioned that a lot of general public readers get a lot of their scientific facts from reading fiction. So there's a definite connection there. So
Yeah. Whether they're true or not. So we're like, at least
careful to get it's important to get it right. Great. So thanks very much for a very interesting seminar.
Thank you.
Are you around for the rest of the day, or would you be at drinks at the Red Room later?
No.
Okay, so
Yeah, no, it's a kind of crazy time of year.
Environmental missions, you.
Yeah.
well,
But happy to email anyone.
Yeah.
Chat over email.
Yeah. And actually, Caitlin and I are both at UQ,
Yeah.
so we'll endeavor to come to another drinks.
excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for a great talk.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.